Welcome back, everybody. Hope you had a good break, and I'd like to thank Nathan for his initial keynote speech about what we're going to be talking about in the sessions today. I'm Richard White, Senior BIM Consultant here at Man & Machine, and today we're going to be talking about the ins and outs of ISO 19650 and the UKBM Framework, which has been very close to the work that I've been doing over the past couple of years, and it's a subject that's close to my heart. So we're going to start looking into essentially why we have the ISO 19650. It came about initially because there was a need for the development of international standards. There were a lot of clients who were using either the UK standards or some standards from various different countries, and there was inconsistency between the different standards that were being used, especially cross-country, and also there was a drive to tighten up the understanding around BIM delivery and information management across not just the UK but worldwide. So the ISO team and the CEN team were working together to start to put together some new guidance around BIM and information delivery, headed up by Dr. Anne Kemp, who's currently the head of the UKBM Alliance, and we can now see the fruits of those labours coming into the UK construction industry and developing from what were our PAS 1192 suite of documents into now our ISO 19650 suite. So I mentioned the UKBM Alliance. So this is a group of industry professionals who have come together to try and improve the way that the UK construction industry works across all of our different multiple sectors, and we've got lots of different teams that interact with one another. And this group has been formed to help provide a trusted location for people to come together and talk about developing best practices and good ways of working for the industry as a whole. I am actually I'm part of that team, and is involved in quite a lot of the discussion groups and the forums, and I'm also directly part of some of the development groups, developing various different things for the industry as a whole. So there's been a lot of new standards and processes that have been pushed out over the last 2 years since the launch of ISO 19650. But we're going to rewind a little bit just so that you have a bit of a background of where we've come from and where we're moving to next. So we'll start with a little bit of a timeline. So historically, we had a set of standards that were put in place, which was our PAS 1192 suite. And these were initially developed starting back in 2007 with our BS 1192 documentation, which set out some core guidance around the delivery and collaboration for information. And then from that point in 2011, we had the UK BIM task group come together and provide what was one of the core documents to drive BIM adoption across the industry, and there was the development of the 2016 mandate. From that point then on, we had the development of various different parts of the PAS suite through PAS 1192.2, 3, 5 and 6. And the development of those has literally gone all the way through up until 2018 when PAS 1192.6 was released. And then at the tail end of 2018, we started the development of ISO 19650. So around December 2018 and in the UK, January 2019, a couple of the UK standards, BS 1192 and PAS 1192 Part 2, were actually withdrawn and essentially replaced with ISO 19650 Parts 1 and 2, along with a transition guidance Part 0. For those who have been using those PAS suites, the PAS suite of documents, these two particular documents highlighted the naming standards and the project delivery guidance, so specifically around capital delivery. And the new suite of documents had a bit of a reshuffle. So part 1 now covers the concepts and principles around the use of ISO 19650, including some UK specific content around the National Forward and the National Annex in part 2. And now the project delivery standard includes the UK naming standard as part of its annex. And most usefully as part of that initial launch, PD 19650 Part 0 was also released to explain some of the transition between PAS Suite and the new guidance that's being pushed out. So if we jump back to our timeliner, we have seen over the last couple of years a gradual replacement of this suite with new documentation. And we've actually had 2 new parts delivered this year. So in 2019, we had the replacement of essentially part 1 and part 2 of the PAS suite, BS 1192 and PAS 1192 part 2. And then moving into this year, we forgot. At the tail end of last year, we also had the launch of the UKBM Framework, and that's going to be explained a little bit further in the coming slides. So this year we've had the launch of ISO 19650 Part 3 and also Part 5, so specifically around operational management of information and also the security and validity of that secure information that's being produced and some guidance around that. And we're not stopping there. So we have developments of moving forward over the coming years. We've got currently under development ISO 19650 Part 4, which is likely to look at the collaboration of that information and likely including COBE. We're expecting that around 2022. And we've also got a replacement of what was the 8541 series for a future release, and that's also going to be a new ISO standard as well. Currently, there are no plans to replace 11926, but my guess is that it will probably follow in turn, so that we have a complete set of 19650 documents. So I mentioned earlier about the UK BIM Framework. This has been launched around October 2019 to encapsulate all of the important work that the UK BIM Alliance has been doing around guidance and standards, as well as essentially replacing the terminology that had previously been used under the BIM mandate and also under the PAS 1192 suite. So the terminology around around BIM Level 2, which was a key part of PAS 1192 2 and 3, has essentially been replaced by the UK BIM Framework. So when you're starting to get your tenders coming through now, you will have your specification guidance will be around this new framework guidance suite. And this is kind of broken down into 4 key areas. You have your design and build zones, so that's essentially looking at your capital delivery. You have your operate and integrate. So that is focusing more on the operational management part of the asset, and will extend through more long-term planning of that asset information. And these bits of information you can see on the screen are basically captured directly from the UKBM Framework website, which is now a very good source of information to be able to upskill and understand your team moving forward. And the UKBM Framework guidance doesn't just encapsulate the standards. It also captures a lot of really good work that the UKBM Alliance and other professionals have been doing to help either the transition from one system to another, or even just to upskill people in understanding the developments of BIM and construction related digital information management. So we now have launched very recently a new updated suite of guidance, which you can see on the screen now, which outlines some of the key focus areas in the parts down at the bottom of the screen, which includes things like open data formats, common data environments, tendering and appointment requirements. as well as some guidance around the key standards. So at the moment, we have some key guidance around ISO 19650 parts 1, 2 and 3. We're expecting obviously the other ones to follow in due course. But these are really, really helpful documents. They've been written slightly less academically than the standards would have been, and there are some really useful practical examples within those documents that you can download for free from the UKBM Framework website. And here on screen you can see some examples of those documents moving forward. There is actually also a UK learning outcome framework or guide that was produced back in July this year, and this is basically an update of what was set out from the UK BIM task group as part of the learning requirements for developing a team or a training course or something similar for universities for BIM development and understanding across the industry. It was actually, this one in particular is close to my heart because I was directly involved in that document along with our director Phil Reed, in association with the teams that were led by the Centre for Digital Built Britain. That's a nice tongue twister for you, or CDBB. So that was launched. It's a really good document to have a look and get some understanding about what are the key requirements of BIM understanding, and where it may help you focus your deliverables in terms of what you're actually wanting to understand within the new guidance or just across the industry. So we'll have a little bit more of a delve into each one of these ISO standards. So we'll look at parts 1, 2, 3 and 5. We don't have a lot of time today to go into a lot of detail around these, but if I can give you a little bit of the background and understanding of each one of these documents and how it may be useful to you, I think that will give you a good step on your way to understanding what direction you need to go in and which specific documents would be most useful to you as part specific to your section of the industry or your discipline. So initially looking at PD 19650 Part 0, this is a transition guidance. So this is a really good starting point if you've already got experience around PAS 1192 suite of documents. It gives you some key mappings for the transition of terminology between the old systems and the new systems, and how some of those key bits have changed. So it's a really good starting point for teams to start looking at and delving through, specifically around part 1 and part 2. Moving into part 1, this document was essentially written as a guidance document. So it covers off the concepts and principles which have been put in place for the entirety of the 19650 suite. It's written as essentially as a bit of a code of practice for this, and it's not a guide or a standard as such. And it adds best practice and recommendations, and it actually takes a lot of key bits of information from essentially BS 1192, the collaboration document, PAS 1192 Part 2, and PAS 1192 Part 3. It's not. We should note at this point, one of the key drivers for a lot of this redevelopment work was that although BIM is incorporated into this, it's been developed. This whole suite has been developed as more of an information management standard. So there's more of a drive to digital information, digital management, and actually capturing and transferring that information, as opposed to centering all around the terminology that was one of the key drivers previously, which was BIM. So it's not just about 3D models or the documentation, but it's more about the methodologies in which to actually produce that information. So we've got a few sort of key diagrams that actually exist within the 19650 series and specifically part 1. And this first one is looking at business management systems, and the fact that it's a sort of a concentric square sitting with different wrappers around. So you have the ISO 19650 suite in the centre, looking at the key delivery phases around delivery and operations. But around that, we've also got our asset management processes and ISO specifically around that. So we've got ISO 55000 and 21500. And then we've also got our organisational management standards, so specifically around quality, ensuring that that information is being produced and it's good quality information. So 9001 actually has a direct representation within this standard and is linked directly to the production of information. So we want to make sure that all that information, that good information that's being produced, is produced in a very clean and quality managed way, and it's checked by people. So this is quite a good driver forward to start to incorporate a lot of those different business systems into an interlinked, interconnected system across not only just individual businesses but across the whole industry. Okay, so we have two diagrams on the screen now. We have what was the BIM maturity diagram, or what was known as the View Richards BIM wedge, which was developed as part of PAS 11922. And also the information delivery cycle. So both anybody who's been working within the industry should recognise these two diagrams. Because PAS 11922 has essentially been withdrawn, we now have some replacements for these. And in line with that, this is also another way of pulling out that BIM level 2 terminology and moving it back towards this sort of UKBM Framework guidance terminology. So we have a new maturity diagram. It doesn't really have a colloquial name as such. It's kind of, I've heard BIM steps or BIM block, but this is our new maturity diagram, and it basically is built up by 4 key areas. We have our standards layer looking specifically around what standards are required for our project deliverables. We have our technology layer, so this is looking and focusing a lot more on common data environments. Whereas the common data environment was initially part of BIM level 2 and was a specific labelled requirement under the PAS 1192 suite, now actually we've got the incorporation of this central source of truth or a technology-based file exchange, information exchange portal to be incorporated across any type of project. We then have our information layer, which is the second from the top, which now illustrates the fact that we can have different types of information and different levels of information maturity. So we have both structured and unstructured information, and then moving into the stage 2 portion in the centre, we have our federated information models and exchange. So we're looking at more about this collaborative environment in producing that information. And then at the top we have a business layer. And essentially this business layer is allowing teams to focus more on the benefits and improvement from these new standards in this maturity diagram to improve the way that not only teams work internally, within your own business, but across multiple businesses and across disciplines. So a lot of the standards and the processes that are put into this space have to be included to improve the way that you work. And down the side, we also have this improvement, increasing benefits from that collaboration process. And both of these should increase as these are incorporated into a business going forward. We also have a new information delivery cycle. So we've got a few. This looks very similar to the last one, but it's essentially matured a little bit. It's got some additional information around it. So we've got inclusion of more information stakeholders, having more people involved early on to make sure that what's being delivered is the correct information at the right time. We also have a progressive flow of information around the outside of this diagram. So this is moving all the way from our project inception up at the top right hand corner, all the way through our tendering process, our mobilization processes down the side, and then our essentially our data drops across our core sections. We have a section right at the beginning of this graph illustrating pre-project asset information, which was clearly missed from the last diagram, because more often than not we don't start a project without some level of information. And now we have a clear definition that actually that information grows over time. So previously it showed that it growed through the project delivery cycle, so that's part of our capital delivery. But actually that information does grow through the operational cycle as well. As things are replaced, as things change, it's this the merger of making sure that you have a level of information available for those teams that are managing the building, managing the asset, our facilities management teams, and that virtual asset is growing alongside the physical asset. And then down the bottom we've got some sort of key data exchange points, and these are less prescriptive now. So these previously were essentially aligned to stage ends, but actually there is more of a drive of being able to ask for information at specific pertinent points, irrelevant of whether or not you're at stage end or not. So just picking up on some of the key terminology changes that have been highlighted within this initial sort of drive through the from the PAS suite to the ISO suite, we have a lot of changes for an international audience, essentially. So some of the terminology that we would expect and understand from a UK perspective, things like employer and contract, have actually just been tweaked and changed. Some of the biggest changes you can see on the screen here. We've had a shift away from the terminology used around employer. So we've now got specific appointment parties now as part of this ISO suite. We have some slight terminology changes around some of those information requirements. So what was the employer's information requirement has now changed to an exchange information requirement. And what was our PLQs, or plain language questions, have now moved to a project information requirement. So we've got a few key changes, and as I said before, one of those big hitter changes is that the term BIM Level 2 has essentially been dropped and replaced with UKBM Framework. So moving into part 2. This is specifically designed around the delivery stage of delivery phase of assets. It's designed as a specification guidance for to help teams look at the tasks that are required for the delivery of projects moving forward. And a lot of the key clauses around BS 1192 and PAS 1192 Part 2 have been incorporated into these, some into the main body document, where it's relevant to an international audience, and some into the UK National Annex, which is currently undergoing a little bit of a revamp and an update. So we're expecting a new version of the UK National Annex coming out of some of the discussions with the UKBM Alliance and their forum groups. So we're just awaiting to see what those changes are likely to be, but they're likely to be just some minor tweaks, maybe around some naming conventions or classification data, that kind of thing. So one of the main diagrams that sit within this document is this delivery phase of projects, and it's set out over 8 key phases and breaks down the delivery of that information. And interestingly, these phases, actually you don't actually get to the delivery part of that information until you're actually into stage 6 of this. A lot of it is around the planning and the scoping of this information to make sure that the client can get the right information at the right time, and when the project is handed over at the end, or even an appointment scope has been delivered, that they're actually receiving the type of information that they need to move on to the next stage of the project or to deliver that project going forward. So this is a much wider diagram. Each one of these node points breaks out into a lot of smaller task points. We don't really have time to go through that today, but it's this overview is, you'll see a running theme as we go through each one of those documents. We have some changes to the team structure. So we mentioned earlier about the change in terminology around different parties. So we now have in the centre our appointing party, or our client. This is basically that central person that sets up the initial project, and then typically there is only one of those people. It may be a team of people, but there is only generally one appointing party. You may have a group of different lead appointing parties, and there might be different companies. It may be a main contractor, it might be a lead designer, and then underneath that you have your appointed parties. So there will be things like your subcontractors, your design team, any specialist suppliers. So this diagram, what it does now is it encapsulates that whole entire delivery team in one diagram, and then starts to break that down into task teams. And then the ownership of information transfer between those is a little bit more defined. So we now have a specific information exchange between these teams. And that goes all the way from our contractual appointments. So at the start, they will be going and tiered down through the team, and we will also have an information exchange back up the chain as well. So there's a much more defined process in terms of appointment strategy, delivery strategy, and even when we're coming to providing information for that delivery process or providing specific information. As an example here, we picked the EIR. That information should be filtered as it goes through the chain. So it's highlighted and specifically catered for that appointment and for that scope for the individuals that are being appointed at the different stage. And obviously, as a response to this, we have our BIM execution plan running back up the chain and being collated by the different levels of team to pick up the different deliverables and ensuring that what was captured in the exchange information requirements from a client perspective or an appointing party perspective has been realised through the project, and that is now used as a guide to ensure that that information is being produced at the right time in the right way. We also have some tweaks around the common data environment process. Previously, we had our 4 containers all interlinked into one another, and actually the archives portion of this was directly linked to the published information, which was slightly confusing to some people because there was definitely an opportunity of being able to archive information at those different stages, depending on whether redundant information was required or not required and needed to be captured. So we now have a revised diagram illustrating this new process workflow, and also we have a new guidance document. So our guidance part C document now illustrates some of those really good working practices, some worked examples around how information should be processed through a common data environment. And we've developed some different workflows with our client base to illustrate the ways in which information might be produced. And that is a direct representation of some of this guidance information. And it's essentially should be CDE agnostic, so it doesn't matter which CDE platform you are using. This process and these diagrams can be applied or should be able to be applied to any of these. So these can be really good KPI testers, especially when you're starting to pick and select a common data environment for your project. Okay, so now we're moving on to some of our new content. So released back in August 2020, we have our replacement to PAS 1192.3. This is our new operational phase of asset specification guidance. And again, it's been developed in very much the same way as parts 1 and part 2. And is basically set out again in the same form as the other ones as a specification. And is capturing a lot of the clauses again from our BS 1192 document for the collaboration of information and PAS 1192.3 to ensure that that information that is being produced at a capital phase is also then being realised and considered also for operational. And that might be new operational assets, it might be existing operational assets. But we'll look into some of the ins and outs of the changes that exist within this new document. So some of the principal differences is in this new document is we have a couple of again some new terminology. So we have these things called trigger events, and basically these are the reasons why we might need to commission or produce some new information from an operations perspective, and that might be on a new asset, or that might be on specific maintenance needs. We also have multiple pathways. So with the delivery phase of assets, we have a single strand of process in terms of the ways in which this is being delivered. But with the operational phase, we have three core pathways, which we'll look at in a little bit more detail in a second, which will be focused around planned, unplanned, and acquisition assets. We also have the incorporation of long-term asset plans. So this is looking at ensuring that the data or the information that's being produced has longevity, has some good guidance around reusing that information, storing that information so it can be reused, and also specifying that information so that in the future you have the right information at the right time. So there are lots of new feedback loops that within the new diagrams that allow for this long-term planning of assets. And finally, we've got a slight tweak to the appointment stage EIRs, whereas within a delivery phase, we've got the use of an EIR to be able to look at the scope specifically around capital delivery. This particular scoping could be using an EIR to develop the asset requirements. So we've got a slight change in terms of the diagrams that are used around the use of information requirements from an operational side. And that's explained quite well within both the standard guidance. There is actually a BSI guidance document, a transition guidance document for PAS 1192.3 as well. And also the UKBM Alliance in development for the UKBM Framework have developed a guide around Part 3 as well. So all of these bits should help you on your way around the operational guidance changes. So now we have a nice big diagram. So this is just going to build in the background as we talk over it. And here we can see our three pathway streams. So we have our pathway stream B, C, and D in here. And these diagrams have been developed in very much the same way as the one that's in Part 2. But there's a lot more questions and results to consider moving through the different phases of asset information production and capture. So if I just skip through a little bit of a brief explanation around what some of these are capturing, what you'll actually see is the core task groups or the activity groups actually are very, very similar to Part 2. We've got a few key changes where we might have provision of specific types of service. We've also got the culmination of an asset information model, where we've got in Part 8, we've got the AIM aggregation. But actually the capture of that, of a lot of those information groups it works in very much the same way as Part 2 was. The groupings, however, obviously are now slightly different. So we've got this overarching band around the outside for our project environment. We have our different pathway streams in the centre, and then we've got specific activities around information planning and information delivery. And then we also have our trigger events. So we talked earlier about these trigger events being a key portion incorporated into this diagram. And then we've got some sort of decision points. So at different points within this diagram, we've got these little diamonds that say, what do you want to do at this point? You've started this project, which direction do you want to move in? And this is the way in which this now splits out into the different pathway streams. So we've got lots of different questions that might be asked and actions and sort of repercussions for those directions being taken. So let's have a look at these different multiple pathways. We have these split pathways. This, B up the top is probably typically the one that will be used most often. And these are for planned maintenance events. So on a project, when you're delivering that information, we'll be moving through our B stream and looking at the ways in which information needs to be produced or captured for our planned and known events as we go through the operational life cycle of a project. We've then got pathway C, which is typically used around the acquisition of information. So this isn't necessarily producing new information, although there may be some that is produced as part of the acquisition, but this is more around capturing that information that needs to be transferred from one owner to another. So you'll see as part of that diagram, a lot of those key stages are actually missing, because more often than not, you're not producing necessarily commissioning someone to produce a lot of new information as part of that acquisition. And then we have our pathway C, which is used for unplanned events, or those disaster environment sort of events that might happen to our building. So it might cover things like emergency breakdowns, or something being broken, or like those disaster events, a fire or something similar to that, where you need to start commissioning a team to do something in a more rapid output. And those are directly represented by these trigger events. So I've got a few up on the screen now that will illustrate the different types of trigger event that might be listed within here. The annex part of ISO Part 3 actually contains a list of example trigger events that might cause you to go down one of these pathway routes. And we've got anything from change of ownership, which we mentioned before, through to capturing specific types of information for maybe some cost planning, some maintenance, doing things like inspections. You're creating new information that's being produced. So it's focusing you specifically on why are you trying to capture this information and who do you need to produce it. Finally, we're on to part 5. So we'll move it. So this document has been basically developed. This was developed and released slightly earlier than part 3, a month or two before, and this one is focusing specifically around the security-minded approach to managing information and production of information across any type of asset. So that might be specific to operations teams, it might be specific to delivery teams. Actually, this has been designed to be able to be incorporated into any of those delivery processes. Developed with CP&I, who were also part of the original development team for PAS 11925, and a lot of the good work that was put into PAS 11925 has now been transferred into the international standard. So there is no UK national annex for this particular part, because it's actually captured all of that really useful information as part of that delivery. And it's focusing a lot more on security information requirements. So the old PAS document had a lot of acronyms within it, and a lot of those have been stripped out to make it a lot more easy to understand. And again, as expected, we have a new diagram. We actually, within this document, we've got 3 core diagrams. We're only going to show a couple of these today. This one is the overview diagram. It looks very much the same as the ones that were delivered as part of part 3 and part 2. But what you can see within this specific diagram is that we've actually got direct links to each one of those activities. So we have got highlighted within here under the section D and E, we've got our operational activities for part 3 and our delivery activities for part 2. And they are directly related to the production of those bits of information. But prior to that, we've got the production and management of security strategies and protocols, looking at security process mapping, looking at security information requirements, and getting all of that good stuff captured as part of your EIR process. This is a very much more practical delivery process. So we're looking at the ways in which this is being strategically delivered. We have a triage diagram that looks around specific questions around how that information is being produced, and it takes into account all of our new terminologies and processes that might need to be considered when producing the information. We also have our information protocol. Now here we can see that we have the old one, but I'll flick up our new one, which should come up any second. There we go. We have an updated version of our information protocol. So previously this was developed in line with or was known as the CIC BIM protocol. This is now an information protocol. So again, we've started to move away from this BIM terminology use and more around information production. And this document has been redeveloped by some of our legal specialists within the UKBM Alliance and BIM for Legal to simplify what was seen as a bit of a complicated subject, to produce a document that can be added as an addendum to current contracts to ensure that you're capturing all of that good legal representation around your contractual environment. We're not legal specialists, so I can't necessarily tell you all of the ins and outs about this document, but it's essentially got it signposts some of the key information that's been produced as part of that project to be pushed out and captured from a ownership point of view, to make sure that you don't get legal ramifications down the line by people either not releasing information or keeping information to themselves when actually it should be released to somebody else. And we would always advise, obviously if you're trying to incorporate this into your projects, make sure that you're consulting your legal specialist within your business or your any sort of legal advice to be able to incorporate this correctly as part of your project delivery. And as I noted at the start, we have ISO 19650 Part 4 coming soon. We're expecting that around 2022. I'm not going to labour too much on it at the moment because we don't really know the full ins and outs of what's coming. But we can, what we can say is that it's in development, and there's what we're expecting is likely to be that the UK version will likely to have a UK annex which will encapsulate the UK part of COBE. My hope is that actually COBE will be overhauled and we have an international view on how COBE should be delivered across the world, but maybe that's just a pipe dream. So what's the impact of this to your business? There's a lot of information and a lot of standards and a lot of changes going on. The UKBM Framework has been developed as part of this wider overarching view as things evolve and change. So it's been developed specifically to look at the outcomes for your business. You're looking to get best practice out of what you're delivering, and looking at some of these core areas and incorporating that good business practice, those good workflows and processes within your business should help you, win new work. With the incorporation of things like the quality management systems and ISO 9001, you want to improve the quality of your work and any outputs. The hope is that if you start producing better quality work more efficiently, the costs will come down and you'll be delivering it more safely and on time. So it's looking at the core ethos behind businesses, making sure that they can work efficiently, they've got a good, well-educated workforce to deliver things on time, on budget. And a lot of this good practice is captured within the guidance documents. And from our point of view, I do a lot of teaching with professionals out in the real world when we're not in the virtual environment. And we like to capture sort of some of these guidance changes, the terminology changes, as well as feeding that into business process, workflow management, strategic approach to business, looking at your technology, your hardware, your software, and helping educate people in new ways of working to get that efficiency out of the teams. So we're here to sort of help develop your teams and help to make a big change to what's going on. And what we often see is when we talk to businesses, they normally fall into one of three categories. And it's something that I often ask at the start of a discovery meeting with our teams. Where are you on your journey? So we often find that some businesses are brand new to BIM, brand new to that digital management process. Some businesses have actually taken really good strides towards incorporating the PAS 1192 suite into their business, have had a lot of successes in putting that in, but actually since the new standards have been released, they haven't changed that terminology, so they're still stuck delivering things to what was sort of BIM level 2 outputs, and haven't updated things to include all of the new good work that's sitting within the ISO standard. And then finally, we normally get a halfway house between those two. We get businesses which have tried to implement something, have pushed through something, and it just hasn't stuck. It hasn't succeeded, or it's been forgotten, and actually they've reverted to their old ways of working, and actually now they're probably losing work because they can't show that evidence of moving with the new standards and the new guidance that is out there to be able to win that work. So we come into businesses and do some assessments around what they might need. Understand from a perspective, look at the gaps within the businesses, understand their issues, and then support them through that process. We're not here to do everything for them. We want to educate their teams and educate the individuals within their teams to be able to transfer that knowledge and upskill their team to be able to develop and grow the business. So we've got processes involved, which may be a business assessment, a gap analysis, a strategic plan, which we'll be able to see an example of one here. So we look at very high level, we look at company level stuff, we look at project delivery level information, and how we can start incorporating a lot of the new terminology, some of the process outputs into the business. And actually do it stage by stage. Don't try to do everything in one go. Try to deliver a project which has specific needs, test stuff out, do a review, do some feedback, feed that back into the wider picture. Then do your next project, maybe add something new in or tweak something from the previous one. We've seen time and time again where big change actually causes such a headache to the teams, and inherently people don't like change. So doing the drip feed process in understanding where quick wins can be very beneficial, and adding that into the process going forward. So we help companies understand and realise the ways in which this can be delivered. And there's a lot of information. It's continually changing. We try as a business, and I try as myself, to keep up to date with that, and being part of things like the UKBM Alliance, being part of Building Smart, understanding the changing face of construction process, and incorporating that into various different types of business. We've got a lot of experience in doing that now, and it's something I'm very, very passionate about. So with so much to understand, invariably you can't do it all on your own. We're here to help. We've got lots of good team members out there that can come into your business and understand and explain and teach and do all those really good things to help upskill your staff. So essentially that kind of brings me to the end of my session. I hope that's been really helpful. If you want to understand more around the ISO suite, more around the UKBM Framework, come give us a call, send us an email. Come and speak to us. We can set up some meetings and understand what you need to do next. We've got a wealth of information that I'm happy to spread the knowledge around. So come and speak to us when you can. So I'd like to thank you for listening to my session. Hopefully that's been educational and helpful to you all. We're just going to go into a short break now, but we will be back around 11:15 with our next session. Thanks.